Does it mean to you to have not only this exhibit, but just, you mentioned before how people come to you and they say, oh, this film is still GOAT, which I found hilarious, but I mean, it really
I've
makes
only just learned that
films,
phrase.
really, because it really makes the films timeless in that way. I mean, I think the music also has a big aspect of it, especially for me. Clockwork Orange really connected with me for that reason, but I'm just curious, what does it mean to you for like decades and decades that people still come back to these films?
Why do people still listen to Bach?
Yeah.
Why do people still look at Van Gogh paintings? I think if the art, whatever it is, whatever form it takes, whether it's painting or music or film, is honest and speaks to people, then it will last. I think a lot of people think that film is a sort of one view consumer project. I mean, obviously a lot of films are, but if you've put a lot of heart and soul and thought and effort and money into making a movie, I don't know, to my way of thinking, you should be wanting to make a film that lasts. I mean, why would you make something that you just think, oh, people are going to forget it by the time they've walked out of the cinema? It's one of the great art forms. Cinema is one of the great art forms, or film is one of the great art forms. It involves story and music and acting and design, and it is so all-encompassing of all the arts. So you have a lot of different artistic disciplines that come into making a film. So I think it's one of the great art forms. It's new in terms of world art, but I think film has one of the, good films make a great contribution to the quality of our lives, I think. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Yeah. Do you feel heavily impacted by your mother in pursuing art? I understand she was a painter as well. And
yes, my mother.
Jewelry.
Yeah, my mother's an artist. She's a very good painter. She has a very good website, ChristianeKubrick.com. And Stanley found her when he was in Germany, and he was making a film called Bars of Glory, and he wanted an actress for the last scene. And he was watching television, he saw her in a play, called her agent, asked for an interview, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, but she had been acting to earn a living, but she didn't really want to be an actress. She always wanted to be an artist. So being with Stanley meant that she didn't have to act anymore, and she could be a painter. So there were two artists living in the same environment and encouraging each other, and they were a great team, those two.
I've noticed listening to you before, and just in general, Stanley always wanted to make everything like a family affair. Like he'd have you guys always involved in the films as extras, or working, especially with you with art and all that kind of stuff. And I know you sourced the carpets and The Shining and all that.
Yeah, no, I think if Stanley had his way, we would all have worked in the film industry, because as far as he was concerned, why wouldn't you want to work in the film industry? He was very pleased that I went into the art department in films and had my own career apart from working for him. My late sister Anya, she was an opera singer, so obviously film business wasn't for her. And then my youngest sister made a documentary on The Shining. So he was very keen for us to be involved, because he thought it was, the best business to be in. And he would involve us whenever he could. So we were always together as a family. We always traveled everywhere together. Everything was based from home. And so we were all, if not directly involved, we were all there, and he would show us drawings and not scripts, but drawings or concepts, or talk to us about ideas that he had, and what do you think about this and what do you think about that. So yeah, we were always a team. One
of my favorite movies personally is Barry Lyndon, and I've always been curious about I already received threats for having British soldiers essentially on Irish soil.
No, they were Irish soldiers. What we had is we had a British film crew, yeah. And we were in Waterford, and it was all the soldiers were all Irish soldiers, and a lot of the crew were also Irish. but the main film unit was British, and we were renting a house, and there was a cleaning lady, and she said some guys came to clean the windows or paint the house. I can't remember which way it was, and they said, "Oh, these people are not who they say they are. We know who these people are." And there were difficult times in Ireland at the time, and then I think there was a phone call received, and it was made very obvious that we needed to not be there anymore, and that there was a potential threat against the crew, if not us directly. And I was actually not in Ireland. I was back in England at the time when it happened, and they just had to hightail it out of there. And Stanley said, it's just a movie. It's not worth anybody getting hurt for. So he was very pragmatic from that point of view. So then they moved to England. The whole unit moved to England, and I went back on the picture, and we all started looking for locations again, and we set up in Salisbury. They set up the production offices in Salisbury.
AI, a film that Kubrick really started being interested in all the way back to the 70s. Stanley really wanted to make this film, and it seemed that it was just like stagnant in development hell for so long, and he wanted Steven Spielberg to make it. And I'm just curious, why did he think that the technology was just never good enough? I've read that he watched Jurassic Park, and he was even more moved to choose Spielberg, but then Spielberg convinced him to take back the project. Would that have still been done if Eyes Wide Shut, if he hadn't passed away after Eyes Wide Shut?
No, there were certain sequences in the film in AI that CGI hadn't caught up to at that point. They weren't very good at doing fur, and they weren't very good at doing water, and Stanley really was very impressed with Jurassic Park, and when he approached Steven and said, "Look, I really think you should direct this and I'll produce," Steven was surprised, obviously, but then I think very encouraged, and he didn't give it back. I mean, Stanley was going to do it after AI. It was fully his intention to work on AI. He thought that, he told me that he thought he would make it too dark, and that it was more Steven's subject matter, and that that the two of them would collaborate very successfully. They were really good friends, and they talked about it a lot, and I think it probably would have been a very good collaboration. I think AI is already a very dark film, and I think but Stanley thought that Steven's sensibilities were more appropriate for the subject matter. But
do you feel if he lived that he would have stuck to directing the project himself, or?
No, he wanted Steven to direct it. I mean,
no matter what. I thought Steven still felt that he wanted Stanley to direct it.
No. I think they more or less agreed that Steven would direct it, and Stanley would produce it, and they would collaborate on it. I think that was a done deal. So I'm very pleased that Steven made it.
How do you feel Stanley would have looked at technology like the de-aging stuff they used in The Irishman recently, or?
In the what?
Like the de-aging technology they used in The Irishman recently.
I haven't seen The Irishman, but Stanley would have loved all the new technology for sure, and I think he would have just been finding ways that he could incorporate all the new stuff into a new story. He never knew what film that he was going to be making next, and he was a voracious reader, and he said that finding a story was finding a good story that he wanted to make and that he'd fallen in love with was the most difficult thing for him, and it took him years to decide what to make, or to find a good story that would sustain him throughout the filmmaking process, because you have to really love it and believe in it and trust in your instincts, and then you have to do all the research, which was part of the thing that he liked doing a great deal, was the research, because it's like he cut filmmaking into thirds. First third was research, second third was filming it, and then the last third was editing, and that was his favorite process of the whole thing, was the editing.
Did you personally watch Dr. Sleep? I'm curious what you thought.
Sorry, have I seen it?
Yeah.
I've seen it. Well, I haven't seen it finished. I saw it a couple of months before it came out.
There's something I've always been curious about, because you mentioned before how much Stanley loved New York. I know I've read that after he got his pilot license, after he felt that commercial airlines weren't as safe, and he didn't really like traveling by flying anymore.
He did have a pilot's license, and he flew a very small plane himself. But what happened was that his good friend was killed in an air accident, and Stanley's, being the closest friend, was sent all his friend's personal effects, and I think it just freaked him out completely, and he just couldn't cope with it. So he just didn't fly. He didn't have to fly. So we always went everywhere by ship.
And I guess just to leave on a good note, what's your favorite part of this exhibit here, the museum?
The 2001 exhibition. Yeah. I like seeing all the sketches and the artwork. Actually, it's good fun. It's lovely. It's very interesting to see the process, the way people's minds were getting to the final result. So there's lots to see.